For the past year, one of the most asked questions I get is how I sharpen my knives to get such clean cuts. So, I finally made this video to show you how I sharpen my knife and hook knife, using simple tools and techniques. One of the reasons it took me so much time to make this video is that I myself am constantly learning how to properly sharpen my tools. One thing I've learned in the last 10 years of sharpening is that there's always more to learn. I'm sure some of you who watch this video will have comments and critiques about my methods, and I fully encourage you to leave a comment so we can all learn more from each other. The world of knife sharpening is huge, and while there are already many good videos available, I decided to show you the technique I believe is the simplest to start with. In the last video, I made a simple kit for sharpening both a straight knife and a hook knife, so I'll be using this kit for demonstrating here. I'll start with the Mora 120. As you can see, the damage on the blade is quite severe, which means I need to remove a lot of material to get a clean edge with no dents. Since I'll be working with wet sandpaper, I make sure to cover my work surface as it will get wet and messy very fast. I make sure my sharpening tool is high enough so I can comfortably move the knife back and forth. I clamp it into the table to keep it stable while I use both hands on the blade. Many times I've been too lazy to fix my sharpening surface in place, holding it with one hand while sharpening with the other. While it's possible to sharpen this way, it requires a skilled, steady hand and high concentration, which in the beginning can lead to frustration and bad results. My first goal is to remove enough material so the dents on the edge are gone. Here I'm using 180 grit sandpaper, which is very rough. As I'm creating the foundation bevel of the edge, I need to be extra careful. A common issue is that if I move the knife without maintaining a consistent angle, I'll round the edge. This creates a blade that will push the wood fibers apart instead of piercing through with a sharp, flat edge that requires minimal force. This problem is very hard to fix later on with the higher grits, so I make sure to have it in mind in the beginning. So, my focus is on having a stable hand, holding the blade at the same angle and repeating the movement with confidence to maintain a flat surface. A good way to check if I've removed enough material is by looking for the burr. The burr is an extremely thin strip of steel that forms on the blade's edge. It's created by the sharpening tool stretching and pulling the steel into a brittle, flexible foil. The burr needs to be gradually removed by moving up through the grit numbers. I can feel the burr with my fingers or see it by holding the blade under a light source and looking for a thin line of reflection. If I see it across the whole blade, I know it's time to either flatten the other side or, once both sides are done, move to the next grit. Moving to the 320 grit sandpaper, which is still rough and aggressive, I still remain extra careful. Occasionally, I check if the thicker burr has been removed and if a new one has formed. Though I try not to lift the blade too much, especially at the beginning of each grit, because each lift can change the angle and again create a rounded edge. One way to maintain a flat bevel is by pressing with my fingers using both hands on the blade. It needs to be a gentle press, especially with sandpaper on wood, which is relatively soft surface. If I press too hard, I'll form a rounded edge, which again is the opposite of my goal. If I achieve a proper flat bevel with the lower grits, I'll feel the blade stable on the sharpening surface. Light pressure will help me stay more connected with the blade, sensing if it's truly stable and flat. Until I made these sharpening tools, I had never used a grit higher than 1200. From there, I'd go straight to polishing and start carving. However, with this technique, I decided to use 2 more grits before polishing. For my other technique, I move the blade in the opposite direction, as if I'm trying to cut a sandpaper. This way, the burr is smaller since the sharpening tool pushes the steel instead of pulling it. This allows me to stop at 1200 grit before moving to the final polishing stage to make the knife razor sharp. However, the downside of this method is that it's easier to accidentally cut through the sandpaper or damage the whetstone and blade. I spray water to prevent steel particles from clogging the sandpaper, which helps it last longer. Ideally, I'd rinse it under running water, but I was a bit lazy to go to the sink. After finishing with the 3000 grit, the knife is already razor sharp. However, there is still a final micro burr to remove, which will make the edge even sharper and last longer. I'll save this part for later and move on to the hook knife. To be honest, I still have much to learn about sharpening the hook knife. My hook knife doesn't have any dents or severe damage, so theoretically I could have started with 800 grit instead of 180. But knowing that I probably haven't done a good job in the past, I thought it would be a good opportunity to reset the bevel and make sure to flatten it properly, both inside and outside. I'll be making sure my hook knife is high as well, so I'll have some space to move my hand and the sharpening tool freely. Again, I start with the main goal of having a flat bevel, focusing on maintaining a stable hand and a consistent angle. As you can see, instead of having the sharpening tool fixed and moving the knife, I hold the hook knife with my left hand, fixing it in place while moving the sharpening tool. I tried in the past to do the opposite, but because the hook knife is round, I found it was too hard to move it accurately and with control. Dividing the blade into sections and adjusting my position for each one feels like the most comfortable, stable, and intuitive way. When I'm not sure I'm reaching the edge with my sharpening tool, I use a marker to help me see properly where I remove material. This can be done on the straight blade as well, though from my experience, it does block and damage the sandpaper. Although I started by showing you that I'm holding the hook knife by hand, I prefer to use a clamp or a vise to fix it in place. As I said before, I find it much easier to have both hands free to maintain a consistent angle. I use a piece of foam or cloth to protect the handle. This is a bit improvised, so I always need to check if my blade is stable and fixed, tweaking it accordingly. It is important to note that once the hook knife or any sharp blade is clamped, it can become more dangerous. If I lose concentration and forget for a moment that the blade is there, a casual movement to the knife direction could cause a serious deep injury. I try to be creative and use several clamps to hold the knife in place, trying different angles that would be comfortable for sharpening. I sometimes do this as well for holding my wood when I'm carving or using the draw knife, and it's a nice little trick. However, I remind myself that the clamps were not built to be used this way, so they probably won't hold very strongly, and I need to pay attention not to damage my clamps. I found that the tip of the hook knife is the hardest to sharpen. I never managed to get the satisfying feeling of the sharpening tool catching the bevel angle and removing material smoothly. I think it has to do with the fact that it's more flexible, so it requires different pressure. If any of you had the same experience and found some techniques, I would love to hear them in the comments. Well, now that I have a nice burr throughout the whole blade, I can start moving up the grit numbers, slowly removing the burr from each side. Sometimes, when I can clearly see that the burr is big and starting to disconnect, I use my fingers to remove it, bending it back and forth. It speeds up the process a bit and saves me some sharpening strokes. Sharpening can take quite a lot of time and patience in the beginning. It requires the understanding that this skill, like any other, needs a lot of practice, but it is necessary when using woodcarving tools. Even if the knife or tool comes razor sharp from the toolmaker, it will eventually get a dent or lose its edge. In my opinion, the whole enjoyment of woodcarving is the satisfaction of piercing the wood with a sharp tool. So having a sharp knife is the foundation for a calming meditative carving session. Talking about new skills, I wanted to share with you one that I'm practicing at the moment. The main way of my self-expression has always come from my hands, while talking and expressing myself verbally has always come with self-doubt, fear, and no confidence. Even with having some practice here on YouTube with written scripts, I can feel that I need much more to get better. So, I opened a Patreon page where I'm making videos with live narration. I want to reach a point where I can make more videos for you here faster and with more value. If you enjoy my videos and creations and want to support me there as well, you can visit my page and have a look. I would deeply appreciate it. The messy part is over. After using the final grits, it's time to move on to honing the blade with a polishing compound and a strop. I have here a kit made by FlexCut. I've been using it for around 10 years already and I really enjoy it. Though, wanting to find something more accessible, I decided to make my own strop and try a polishing compound made for cars. I saw it in a different YouTube video and I wanted to try to see if it's worth anything. You can find it in hardware stores or car shops easily, so I thought it might be a good find. I never used it before and I was truly curious how it would perform. Just by applying it to the strop, I could already sense it's a bit too thick and grainy. I honestly wasn't sure if it made any difference. I might have not used it correctly, but still, it didn't really work with the strop that I have. Though I do know that finding a polishing compound similar to the FlexCut one is quite easy. They are found in hardware stores as well and are used for jewelry and polishing metal in industrial work. Usually, the strop is made of leather. I don't like buying new leather, but when I do use it, I look for an old leather bag that I can disassemble and recycle. Sadly, I didn't have any at the moment, so I used a piece of canvas, which can work as well. I used some leftover dowel and wood from the other sharpening tools, but they were a bit too short and, as you can see here, not very comfortable to use. Having a proper one, the same length as my other tools, would be much better. The polishing compound acts similar to the sandpaper. It removes material and takes care of the microscopic burr that is left, leaving us with a clean sharp edge, ready for use. After having my tools ready and sharp, I'll be using the strop quite often, between carving sessions or when I feel my blade has lost its razor sharp edge. Well, the tools are ready for use, and this video has come to its end. Although I'm no expert in knife sharpening, I hope I managed to share some of my tips and techniques properly. My methods are always developing, so I'm sure there will be more sharpening videos in the future. Thank you for watching. Keep creating, and I'll see you next time.